Oh, I know. These things. Oh, yes. Yes, exactly. It's coping better.
Well, I'm an engineer, but I'm building a lot of tools. Yeah, build up. So these ideas, build up and share philosophical questions we have to get out shared as well. Oh yeah. It's the notes and the team that notes and the highlights
To do it in a way. Yes, a little bit around the corner.
it comes from the real world, real interesting. So I just need to about
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming along tonight to Barnes Philosophy Club. How many of you got the email this afternoon?
Yeah.
And yet! So no one to blame but yourselves, but we really appreciate you being here. We were planning to hear from Professor Mona Simeon about whether AIs know things and are thinking agents. She was struck down, I think, literally overnight with an illness. I don't think it's serious, but she could not make it. So as a result of that, you will be hearing on the even more vexed topic of whether Robin and Nick know things. Anything at all, which is a question we're regularly asked. And so we pulled the emergency cord. We know this is a vital public service and we didn't want to deprive anyone. So our emergency talk is on the Stoics, ancient wisdom and modern memes. Who's sort of vaguely familiar with Stoicism? Who's heard about it? Those sort of, yeah, it looks like about a third maybe. So it's an ancient school of thought and it's focused on living a thoughtful, rational, balanced life where we think about the health of the mind and the proper response to external events. And it's enjoying a bit of a revival, as you'll see. There are modern Stoics, which Robin's going to talk about. There are message boards. Lots of public figures like to talk about Stoicism or characterize themselves as Stoics. And we're going to run through a bit of all of that in the next 45 minutes or so. So I'll talk a little bit about the origins of Stoicism and why ancient Stoics still appeal, at least to some of us. And then Robin is going to get into the modern Stoics. We'll then have a look at some of the themes from probably the best known work by a Stoic, which is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. You've probably heard of that, lots of you. And then we're going to unleash Robin on his psychometric analysis of Stoicism. We'll be keeping you to 10 minutes on that. And then we're going to finish on objections to Stoicism, like some of the conclusions and the legacy. And then we will open it up, and our lovely assistant, Paul, will be skipping lightly around the room with his microphone. Thank you to Paul for trying to get other sort of emergency options in place today. I think we had 12 rejections, which is the most we've had since Valentine's Day, isn't it? But we have some future speakers lined up. Anyway, so the name Stoicism comes from this building on the left-hand side, the Stoa Poikile, which is the painted colonnade on the north side of the marketplace in Athens. Stoicism flourished for about 500 years and was a big influence on Roman emperors. We'll hear about that, slaves and senators alike. Today it's experiencing a bit of a revival, and we'll talk about some of the influences later. But really the first Stoic was this chap on the right, Zeno of Citium. He is not to blame for the paradoxes. That was another Zeno. But he was a Greek merchant who arrived in Athens after surviving a shipwreck. And he, according to the story from Diogenes, he picked up a copy of a book by Xenophon, which talked about Socrates, and he was so captivated by Socrates that he abandoned his commercial life to study philosophy under various teachers. Why was he associated with the Stoa? It was because actually he didn't have anywhere private to teach, unlike Epicurus, who had his own lovely garden. And this was an open to all place where anyone could come along and talk to Zeno about philosophy. So it was very symbolic of the outward facing, engaging with the public priority that the Stoics placed on their philosophy. And unlike Socrates, he died with a very good reputation. He was honoured by Athens. They gave him a golden crown and a public burial, which is remarkable for someone who was actually a foreigner. But very few of his none of his writings actually survive. It's all second-hand. We know his ideas through later followers. And he thought about really several things, and we'll talk a little bit about some of these themes, but very interested in logic and the art of arguing and speaking, some deep interest in physics and metaphysics, how nature works, how the universe is rationally ordered, and then finally, and this is perhaps the topic that resonates most a couple of thousand years later, is ethics and how to live well. But it's actually three later Roman Stoics who've been most influential. We'll touch briefly on two, and then we'll talk a little bit about the third in some more detail. So Epictetus was born enslaved in Hierapolis, which was in Turkey, modern Turkey. Later freed and studied under Stoics and eventually founded his own school. He taught that philosophy is a way of life, centering on controlling one's own judgments and desires. None of his writings survived, but the discourses were noted down by a pupil and digested into a handbook, the Enchiridion, which is quite short and manageable, and is a guide to practicing the basic Stoic tenets. And his emphasis on focusing on what is up to us has influenced a lot of later thinkers as well as some modern psychological therapies. So you could see Epictetus as one of the most practical and influential Stoics. The second we'll briefly touch on is Seneca. Seneca the Younger, originally born in Spain around 4 BCE. He became a senator, a public figure, also a tutor and advisor to the Emperor Nero, famously. So it sort of illustrates perhaps the limits of Stoic teachings that didn't end well for anyone. He wrote lots of essays which are interesting, and letters to a friend called Lucilius on ethics and resilience, and you can read those now. It's called Letters from a Stoic, and that's a really big part of the surviving Stoic literature. And he had a bit of a tough time. He was wealthy and a public figure, but he was sick for much of the time with problems with his lungs, and he also had the rare distinction of being sentenced to death twice by 2 separate emperors. The first time it was commuted to exile, but the second time it was Nero, so that was that. But we're going to spend most of my time on Marcus Aurelius, who lived from 121 to 180 AD and was emperor for the last 19 years of his life. And he was one of the least bad emperors, the last of the 5 good emperors, according to Gibbon's History of the Decline and Fall of Rome. And he had a really difficult reign, shoring up the northern borders, and lots of fighting with Germanic tribes, which was pretty tough, and continual crises, including the plague for the last years of his rule. And he ruled jointly with his brother until his brother died, I think 8 years into his reign. But he'd been interested in philosophy from childhood, and had been introduced by one of his teachers, Rusticus, to Epictetus's discourses, and that really was what turned him onto philosophy and got him so interested. And his key work was this notebook of reflections, really. It's called the Meditations. And that's about how to apply ethical and theological principles in daily life, including political and public life. And he really centres on the importance of living an ethical life under adverse conditions, which certainly is a good description of his time in Rome. So thinking of the principles that Marcus Aurelius and the other Stoics emphasised, we've pulled out 4 really critical things. The first is that really the only good in life that you should aim for and that you can rely on is reason and virtue, your own good behaviour. And things like wealth, health, reputation, you should be indifferent to. You might be moderately interested in them, but they don't fundamentally matter. Second is this idea that we must live in accordance with nature. So there's an idea that the universe itself is rational and ordered in some way, so that people will flourish by using their own reason to align their choices with that cosmic order, accepting the events that happen as part of a larger providential whole, and making your own decisions rationally and ethically within it. Third point is to focus only on what is in your control. Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca, they all stress the distinction between what is up to us, our own judgments, intentions, and actions, and what's outside our control, the outcomes of those actions often, how other people act and how they think of us. And they all urge us to direct our energy only towards the former, and respond to the latter with calm acceptance. So this idea that you should be cultivating inner discipline over emotion. Also, Robin pulled out the sort of essences of ancient Stoicism. These are things that I think really knit together a lot of the ideas. So logos being this deeper, rational fire. It's described as metaphorically, but it's this logical, orderly structure of the universe and of ourselves that animates everything. Second is what we've called cosmopolitanism, and this is really the idea that we are all members of the human race. We have a lot in common. We have kinship and duty to everyone, not just our particular tribe or our family or ourselves. And the third essence is that a lot of the emphasis is on daily practice, Stoic techniques, thoughts, questions to ask yourself, responses to rehearse, writing down things about your day and how you've responded, but also memento mori crops up frequently, and Stoics think we have a lot to learn and a lot to gain by thinking about our own deaths. So we'll touch on that in a minute. But first, so why do ancient Stoics still appeal to lots of people? Well, I think probably, from least convincing to most convincing reason. Firstly, to the extent you do embrace the idea that the universe is rational and orderly, that's a comforting sort of metaphysics compared to, for example, Schopenhauer or someone that's a bit more depressing about the nature of the universe. So that gives us a larger purpose and a context. We're rational, we're participating in an orderly universe with a purpose that it's realizing. So I don't know how much people buy into that, but that's certainly a part of the broad appeal. Secondly, this focus on autonomy and the self and respect for the self. Stoicism promises to free us from being a slave to fortune and to events. We can take control, and we can rise above pleasures and addictions as well as pain. So health, wealth, fame and so on are outside our control, but we can control our beliefs, knowledge and virtue. That's not me, is that? Okay. If you can remember to turn your phones off if you haven't already, that would be fantastic. And these sort of lasting goods enable us to achieve happiness. So the idea that we can control our minds and our thoughts has been something that's gained increasing currency throughout history, and that leads into, I guess, the final 2 points here. The Stoic principles are anti-consumerist in a way. They encourage us to reject some of the more perhaps distasteful or vulgar aspects of modern life. You focus on your own conduct rather than accumulating wealth and goods. So, as Marcus Aurelius puts it, where there are things that appear most worthy of approbation, we ought to lay them bare and look at their worthlessness. Outward show is a wonderful perverter of the reason. So this is the idea that we shouldn't get distracted by luxuries. But it doesn't take it too far. It's moderation rather than abstinence. And Seneca particularly, but all of the Stoics encourage participation in society rather than withdrawal from it. So you can really get involved in talking to people and participating in politics even. It doesn't mean forgoing goods entirely or even power entirely, which is very convenient if you have lots of those things. In this way, it's rather more appealing than perhaps Christianity might be to people who value wealth and power. But it is a very practical and intelligible philosophy. Stoicism is often framed as precepts, advice, even commandments. It's often do this, and it's how to act in real situations. So I won't run through these, but the last book in Meditations, book 11, essentially has rules for living. Things like always consider your duty to others, understanding their wrong acts and why they happen, dwelling, of course, on our own death, and various other sort of practical rules. And we can come back to those in the discussion if people like. And this has caused, I think, various public figures to become fans of Stoicism. It's been very popular with various presidents. I've got Bill Clinton here and Theodore Roosevelt with his bear. Also Wen Jiabao from China, one of the reformist premiers in China. It's also quite popular with business people. Jack Dorsey, who founded Twitter and is now a chief exec of Square, a payments company. He's very, very keen on Stoic exercises to sort of build resilience. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, is a big fan of Stoicism too. And I think this is because, well, partly I said, Stoicism is quite relaxed about wealth and power. It can also be seen, I think, as quite a macho philosophy in some ways. It's very focused on personal resilience, mental strength, and this gives it some appeal with people who are operating under sustained high-stakes pressure, and that explains perhaps why it's very popular with political, business, and other public figures. There is a question, which Robin might touch on, as to whether some of the more nakedly ambitious figures are practicing genuine Stoicism with its communitarian ethics, its demands for virtue, or a kind of stripped down resilience toolkit that borrows the name of Stoicism but doesn't have too much to do with it. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Robin to talk a little bit about modern Stoicism and its incarnations. Over to you, Robin.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Well, it's a nice act to follow. Basically, I'm going to try and bring it into the 21st century, maybe even the 20th century, because that's when a lot of the analysis that I want to talk about in terms of what Stoicism is. And a modern definition, straight from Wiki, is philosophy, positive emotions, reduces negative emotions, and helps individuals to hone their virtues. A philosophy of personal virtue ethics informed by a system of logical views on the world. Okay, so how are we going to develop that logic? And I think that's the thing that interests me. And so how do you find where wisdom, courage, justice, and moderation might be? And for me, the big question is, are emotions linked to virtue? And that's where the psychology comes in. So this is a kind of a mini lecture within the bigger lecture. So I'll try and get through it as quickly as I can. So the modern essences, Nick's touched on them: self-control, calmness, self-improvement, system building. And system building is, again, what systematizing your thoughts as much as anything. And I think mind and perspectivism is that insight. How do you gain that insight into what other people are thinking, what's motivating them, driving them to do what they do? Let's face it, so often crazy. Agendizing, making lists of things. We all do that for stress reduction. Relationships and attitudes to them. Again, that's related to awareness and applying that system of logic and perspectivism. Theism, we're kind of going to steer a little wide of, aren't we, in terms of aesthetic beliefs and metaphysics, because we don't want to offend anybody. But there we go. So, modern Stoic authors, there's lots of them about. I subscribe to the Daily Stoic, which is quite good. They sort of circulate about 300 memes and stories, and they kind of recycle them, but it's quite good. Don Robinson I don't know about. I do know Massimo about the Stoic. Again, that's based on, he's kind of taking from Marcus Aurelius. Irvin and Farnsworth, we can find this if you go and look at our video afterwards. I won't go into everything. So social media, I mean, there's all these platforms and websites. Stoicism, Facebook, Discord, and Stoic Fellowship, global networks, people talking to each other and developing ideas. So it's really amazing. Virtue in society, caring for people. And I think what I'm going to be talking about in terms of psychology is which side of the good and evil debate you are. And I think already we're getting a feel for cooperation, kindness, and acting together as opposed to against anybody. And persuasion.
Back to me, Robin.
Oh, that's it. Sorry.
So you're going to full improvisation.
I was.
So yeah, I think as Robin touched on, there's a lot of online activity around Stoicism, hundreds of thousands of members of these groups.
Yeah.
Particularly busy on Reddit and more recently Discord, as well as Facebook. And interestingly, perhaps those are again the more male-skewed platforms, at least historically, so that might be part of it. And Donald Robertson, you were touching on, wrote a lot about Marcus Aurelius. That's the Roman emperor he had in mind. So I was going to spend a little bit of time on a few of the themes from the meditations and how those are translated into online memes on these forums. So this is the ancient themes, modern memes bit. So I have paraphrased some of the quotes. They can be a bit lengthy to make them a bit easier to understand and read. So first theme is around virtue in society. And there's a strong idea throughout the meditations, particularly book 2, that we are made to be virtuous and part of society and to do good to others. And there's a metaphor that crops up several times that you should think of yourself as like a part of the body being society. And so just as feet and hands and teeth must work together with each other, we should approach other people in the same sort of way. He does acknowledge that not everyone exemplifies that behaviour, but it says don't worry, don't get distracted by the depraved morals of others, but run straight along the line without deviating from it. And the line is to do the best thing in the circumstances with great care. Do every act of thy life as if it were the last, laying aside carelessness and irrational passions, since you could depart from life this very moment. So again, a sort of, this could be one of the last things you do, you never know, so make sure it's the right thing. And it is quite funny how often he goes back to how dreadful other people are. So he says in book 5, turn to the morals of those you live with. It's almost impossible to endure even the most agreeable of them, let alone to endure oneself. So he talks about it is tough to be in society, but don't spend too much time lecturing others on how they should be better. He says, let us try to persuade them, even defy them when it's the right thing to do. But when you're blocked by force and when there's no way through, be content and tranquil and do something else instead. Don't strive to do the impossible. And he also has a nice quote about not being surprised by others' bad actions. How ridiculous it is to be surprised at anything that happens in life, like a tourist boggling at local customs. That's book 12. And you can see these sort of ideas are turned into motivational cartoons and memes. We've got a baby here saying, yes, doing something virtuous. This is from Stoic Simple, which is a serial offender, or serial generator of these memes anyway. And this is, I guess, Morpheus from The Matrix, talking about philosophy that follows virtue rather than pleasure being the right way to go. Second theme, and I'll just touch on 4 of these. Obviously, there are many other things we could talk about. Marcus Aurelius, also Seneca, but I'm quoting here Marcus Aurelius again, say, do not pay attention to fame. And fame, understood here meaning good reputation, as well as actual fame as we think of it now. And part of that is disdain for the opinions of the masses. So he says, to care for all men is according to man's nature, but only respect the opinion of those who live according to nature, so the rational and wise people you come across. Of the others, bear in mind what they're like by night and by day, and with whom they live an impure life. Don't value their praise, they don't even respect themselves. So again, there's this odd combination of how we must be virtuous and value and help other people, but other people are often a bit worthless. He touches on regularly. And he says that fame is outside our control, and it's foolish and unwise really to be focused on it as an objective. You're considering someone else's activity to be your own good, in the sense that fame or your reputation is really something that takes place in other people rather than in yourself. And he says, look at the minds of people who seek fame, what they are and what they pursue and avoid. He doesn't even finish the thought, but it's presumably they're quite dreadful people who we shouldn't be emulating. And there's a particular skepticism reserved for any desire for immortality and legacy, which was perhaps a hazard for emperors. He says, consider that everyone who remembers you now will soon also die, and those who succeed them, and even if they didn't, what use would their praise be to you? And consider that those who come later will be just like the people you can't bear now. both are mortal. What is it to you if they utter this or that sound, or have this or that opinion of you? This just in, this is Anchorman, fame is meaningless, because famous people just end up dead and forgotten, like every other human being. And there's a sort of certain irony, I guess, that we're picking up on thoughts from a couple of thousand years ago and saying, we will all be forgotten, so don't worry about it. Clearly, in some ways, disproving his own argument. Self-control. I think Stoicism is often associated with the idea of self-control. And the idea here is that our happiness really depends on our reactions rather than the events themselves. External things don't touch the soul, he says in Book 4, because they are external. Our disturbances come from the opinions within. Later on he says, today I've got out of trouble, or rather I've cast out trouble, for it was not outside but within me and in my opinions. He touches on fairly regularly the idea that we should be kind and forgiving to ourselves in the same way we're kind to others. I shouldn't give myself pain, he says in Book 8, because I would never even harm another. And so this sort of healthy understanding quote is about really being prepared for all adversity. So he had several of his children die, and he touches on that here. He says, if you say, let my dear children live and let everyone praise me, you're like an eye that only seeks out green things. So this is the idea that you have to be ready for everything, even terrible events like bereavement, and it's not fully human, not fully respectable to only long for nice, comforting things. And this comes through in some of the memes around self-control. This is a lot of the memes are very US focused. This was actually a character on Saturday Night Live who's a motivational speaker who shouts at teenagers. So here he is shouting at everyone to stay calm and avoid rage. And then we've talked a little bit about death, which is an idea for many of the Stoics. Supposedly Zeno was told by the oracle that the best way to live is to take on the complexion of the dead. Seneca spends a lot of time, I've got consoling in my notes in quotes, but it's not really consoling. It's sort of giving people pep talks about bereavement. And the idea is that it's foolish to think that people will live forever. We know we're all mortal. So we should try not to be too clingy or possessive or even dependent on them. We should realise that they will go, they won't be here forever, and we should appreciate them while they are here. And Seneca himself was very passionate about his family and his loved ones. Epictetus's manual, the Enchiridion, also talks about loved ones being restored to where they came from when they die, rather than something that we have lost. We aren't given them forever. And in these quotes here, there's the idea that because we all live in the present, it doesn't really matter how long life is. You're not experiencing the future or the past. You're only in the present. And then there's the idea, which I think from Epicurus, that, see how convincing you find this, but he says, you're afraid of death either because there's nothing, you're afraid of the nothingness, in which case there's no sensation, and actually if there's nothing there, there's nothing to be afraid of. But if there is some kind of sensation after death, then it's not death after all, it's something else, so we shouldn't be afraid of it in that case either. And these slightly too neat arguments are definitely favoured by lots of the Stoics. There's also, in the same way that Marcus Aurelius is sometimes a little bit negative about other people, he's also quite negative about life in lots of ways. So he has various descriptions of things that people do in life that are kind of disgusting or banal or mundane, and he says, whenever you're doing something, pause and think, is death such a dreadful thing if it deprives me of this experience? So life isn't that big a deal that we should be terrified of losing it, I guess. And here's a King of the Hill meme. You should meditate on your mortality every day, the notice on the school window. And the teacher admonishing him, if these kids could read, they would be very upset by that. So anyway, plenty more memes available, and this is the place to go for them. I won't dwell on these, but we can touch on them in the discussion. And I will hand over to Robin for a few minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, on the modern analysis of Stoicism.
So, right, sorry about that. This is a lecture by committee, so there's bound to be some controversy. Okay, how do you analyse Stoicism? Can you compare ancient and modern? Mean confusion, there's a lot of confusion about, or is it genuine advice? What is it? Are there different types of Stoic? That's what fascinates me. Is it all just psychobabble? But can you analyse Stoicism and its place in philosophy and ethics using psychometrics? In other words, attitude analysis. I gave a talk a few years ago about analytic philosophy. It was all about word analysis and why analytic philosophy failed because it didn't make certain links between words and meaning. Bertrand Russell was interesting because he actually, in 1904, was actually the editor of Psychology and Philosophy, but it was before Freud and Jung and Cattell and all the psychometrics. So the trying to make a link between psychology and philosophy failed, unfortunately, and he was ridiculed, as you know, in Cambridge. Dialectics are to be seen on a grid. In other words, opposites. You understand things by looking at dialectics and opposites, and they can correlate with philosophical positions. And so my hypothesis is that, is Stoicism a position, or is it an understanding? What is Stoicism? And opposites match psychometric dimensions on a two-dimensional grid. And we'll show this in a minute. Basically, I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. But the whole point is to try to classify and analyze individual philosophies, including Stoicism. Now, this is very basic psychometrics, and it's looking at levels of aggression, levels of self-esteem, empathy, self-pity. But essentially, you've got love, and happiness and heroism and idealism, top right. You've got rage, fight, anger, top left. You've got fear, flight, bottom right. Sullen, hate, from self-pity and aggression and low self-esteem on the left corner. And in the middle is calm. And various personality theories have, alpha, beta, you've probably heard of these, I haven't got time to go into it, delta, epsilon, gamma, sigma, and omega, are basically correlate with the grid, basic psychometric grid. And to the left, you've got selfishness and evil, and then to the right, you've got good and selflessness and idealism. So that's the summary. So the other fascinating concept, I think, is about reason, and that the definition of sanity from the Oxford Dictionary is the avoidance of extreme views. So the psychometrics actually gives you a handle on extremity of views. So around the edges, everyone's crazy because they've got extreme views. But reason moves to within reason, and then to sanity is in the middle. And of course, inspired by empiricists like Hume, who's one of my heroes. But around the edge, you've got rationalists, idealists, skeptics, ascetics. We'll come on to that in a minute. So where are the Stoics, yeah? So how do you do it? Well, this is where I think the Stoics roughly lie in terms of this psychometric system. They're sort of idealistic, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. Because you can analyze morality. Goodness and selfishness to the right, evil to the left. Politics, democratic pro-hierarchy up to the top right, because high self-esteem leads to attitudes to be pro-hierarchy. Communism, revolution, and anarchy is all related to low self-esteem, so they say. Society, extreme individualism is top left, so that's the alphas, that's the Donald Trumps of this world. Communalism and the Pope down to the right. Religion, extreme asceticism is bottom right, where you fight, fear and anxiety and extreme metaphysics lie. The self, heroism, self-sacrifice is top right. Idealism, heroism, high self-esteem, low aggression. So if you look at the individual people that Nick has been talking about, it's an amazing coincidence that Nick and I did not actually agree on the actual key people of Stoicism. But it so happens that this is where I put Epictetus. He's not terribly idealistic, he's a little depressed, he's a little bit more skeptic. Yes, Epictetus. Yeah. And then you've got Marcus Aurelius, who is, shall we say, more horribly pro-hierarchical. And then you've got Seneca, who is definitely more passive, fearful, and ascetic than the other three. But they all live in that zone. And I think this is one of the things about Stoicism, that people can take what they want from Stoicism and apply it to things, not just necessarily the principles. So, you want to do this, sir?
Oh, this is me again.
This is you again. Back to Nick, thank you.
So we're going to close off before we open it up to comments and questions and ideas from all of you, with some objections to Stoicism, and then a little bit on the legacy, and then we'll give our conclusions. So, what are the issues with Stoicism? I think the first is the metaphysics does a lot of work in justifying Stoic thinking. It places a lot of weight on the imperative of living in harmony with the universe, which is supposedly rational and organised for good. But is it? It seems to have a lot of terrible events for us to deal with, for something that's rational and organised for good. And there's still a question about whether it would be right to live in harmony with the universe, and on what bases. So Nietzsche said, in his typical style, "Oh, you noble Stoics, what deceptive words these are. Imagine a being like nature, wasteful beyond measure, indifferent beyond measure, without purposes, without mercy and justice, fertile and desolate and uncertain at the same time. Imagine indifference itself as a power. How could you live according to this indifference? Living, is that not precisely wanting to be other than this nature?" So, Nietzsche, not a fan. That was from Beyond Good and Evil. Although, in response to that, I think we can quote Jeeves in Carry On Jeeves, who says...
Nietzsche is bottom left, by the way.
Bottom left, thank you.
Oh, good.
Jeeves said, you would not enjoy Nietzsche, sir. He is fundamentally unsound. So there's an answer. And I think the advice might be right, even if it doesn't come from emulating a rational God or from nature. You know, if there's a God, all is well, and if randomness rules, don't be governed by it yourself. And that's actually from Marcus Aurelius. So he sort of says, well, you don't really have to buy into the metaphysics, the religious elements of it. Just see the value of order. I think second objection, often levelled at Stoicism, is that it is very self-focused to the point of narcissism. There's this great emphasis on our own feelings, and actually is enough attention paid to other people. And I think that's probably a more unfair objection. As I've said, the Stoics definitely believed in being politically active, and probably the advice from many of the Stoics is best understood as how to play the best role you can in social and political life, avoiding vengefulness, dysfunction, and anxiety that comes from losing control. And they do regard a healthy soul and a healthy mind as the best way of helping other people effectively, even if occasionally, as we've seen, the Stoics are quite rude about other people generally. And the third objection is that really the standards of Stoicism might be a bit unrealistic. You know, aren't we all failing all the time at being perfectly rational, calm, undistracted by worldly goods? That again we could say is a little bit unfair. It's an objection to really any ethical doctrine, right? All ethical doctrines are ideas that we could be better than we typically are. A related objection is that perhaps the Stoics are blaming victims for their failure to respond well to adverse circumstances, rather than trying to help people leave those adverse circumstances or improve them. But Marcus Aurelius, for one, isn't that harsh. He talks about self-forgiveness for falling short and helping others to make the best of things. He says, don't be disgusted or discouraged if you don't get everything right. When you fail, try again, and be content if you mostly do what's right and love returning to the work. So there's that, I think, recognition that this is an effort and we will all fall short. Influences and legacy. You know, very, very briefly, I'll mention Kant, the 18th century philosopher, was a big admirer of Zeno's idea of the self-sufficient sage who can be lord and master of himself and therefore can't be mastered by anyone else. And the idea that was attained by strength in overcoming obstacles and therefore greater than the gods, which don't have temptations or obstacles to overcome. Probably you'll all have been reminded of various religious ideas on which Stoicism certainly seems to have been a big influence. The focus on the individual soul and standards of behaviour, particularly through managing one's own virtues and thought and focusing on the present moment. You know, that really comes through in Christianity and Buddhism, of course. The focus on the present rather than worrying about the past and future. Marcus Aurelius says you cannot lose either the past or the future since you don't have them. The present is the same to all. You know, we're all in the present. Also, the ideas of understanding and forgiving others is very prominent in lots of Stoicism. Finally, Stoicism is certainly, I think, a big influence on current thinking around mindfulness, particularly focusing on the transience of life. He says, don't be disturbed by or identify with movements in the flesh, limit them to their places. But when they naturally rise up in your mind, don't resist the sensation. It's natural, but don't add the opinion that it's good or bad. So there's a very strong emphasis on framing, really, and not adding your own anxiety or negative reactions to things that happen. And that was a really foundational principle of CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, which is the most widely used form of psychotherapy in the world at the moment. And Albert Ellis, who developed it in the 50s, cited Epictetus, really quoted Epictetus. People are disturbed not by events, but by their opinions about events. And that's where the idea of reframing things comes from. So we each have a set of conclusions. I'll do the conclusions about ancient Stoicism. This is the book by Donald Robertson we mentioned. But the Stoics' core insight is really deceptively simple. This thought that we don't suffer from external events themselves, but really from our judgments and our emotions about them. And so from that, it follows perhaps that by developing emotional self-control, we can face anything that life throws at us, from political upheaval to personal loss, with clarity and calmness rather than panic. And that idea is certainly a helpful one today as it was back then. The emphasis on rational decision-making, absolutely central to the Stoics, but I think it's unfair to regard them as cold and unfeeling. They wanted to engage fully with the world, but from a position of judgment rather than impulse. And they saw acting within reason as weighing what's in our control and letting go of what isn't. And again, this is a discipline that maps onto a lot of thinking about leadership as well as about religion and about therapy. The emphasis on virtue is really, I think, the whole point of Stoicism in lots of ways. Righteous and proportionate action guided by the cardinal virtues of wisdom, courage, justice and temperance, and that being the only true good, everything else being indifferent or incidental. Stoicism is fundamentally a philosophy of resilience. I think that is fair. Whether it's Marcus Aurelius commanding armies or Epictetus born into slavery, Stoics thought of adversity as a training ground for character. And conquering adversity isn't about suppressing or denying pain. It's about tolerating it with equanimity and transforming it into growth. And that message, again, I think resonates with some modern thinking about mental toughness and well-being. Finally, the memento mori, the reminders of death. And Stoics saw this as a liberating idea. By keeping our own morality in view, we stop wasting time on trivialities, including impulses and emotions that might lead us astray, and we can start living with a bit more intention. And the Stoics did use humour. They weren't as humorless as they are often characterised, and remind us that wisdom and levity are not opposites. And that's, I think, another important, useful message from the Stoics. Robin will talk about his modern conclusions from Stoicism.
I think it's remarkable that Nick and I actually had no trouble coming to these 10 conclusions, which is really, I think, quite remarkable. Just coming back to something like Aristotle in top right, and people being, shall we say, crazy, that it's always these extreme views that are the ones that cause difficulties. Nick, I was going to talk, I had a slide, and it was all about people, how do they react to adversity. So if you ask someone, how would you react to, well, the shit hitting the fan, for example, okay? And then you'll actually see people, they will react according to their own personality type. And the whole point about Stoicism and self-control is that you do not react according to your personality type. And that then leads to perhaps Stoicism does help you prevent not only yourself but other lunatics with extreme views imposing their wills on others. And I think this then leads on to the understanding and insight about how you deal with other people. And I think that again comes through very strongly in the Stoic literature. Agendizing we've talked about to reduce stress, and again that fits into CBT as well. And managing expectations, as you can see on the top right cartoons of the honey bear, that sometimes you wish for things to happen the way you want them to, and it just doesn't happen that way. And that brings on to perspectivism, an insight into the attitude of others and yourself, of course. And the last but not least is that you respect others and you respect nature. And I think that is one of the key points. So I was going to talk about suggestions for further reading. Obviously, Nick has gone into in some length with Marcus, done a very good job of summarising Marcus. And Seneca, obviously, a little bit sadder and more reflective. Epictetus, I mean, again, what can you say? I mean, that's the fundamentals of insight and self-control. And then the modern books, Darrell Hale, Stoics and Epicureans, Urban, Guide to Good Life, John Sellers, Lessons in Stoicism, and of course Ryan Holiday of the website fame of Stoic Today. So again, those are all very good suggestions for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to us. Apologies you didn't get Professor Syrian, but hopefully that was of some interest, and I think we'll keep it very open and informal. But if you have something you'd like to ask, I mean, it's not that likely Robin and I will be able to answer, but we will be interested in any comments or any thoughts.
We have done our homework, yeah.
We have done as much homework as we could possibly have done under the circumstances in accordance with Stoic principles. So we have the lovely Paul here. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand and Paul will race over to you.
Hi, thank you very much. That was really so interesting and enjoyable. So 2 very small comments, not a question. Would you be willing to circulate what you did? Because there's so much there and it would be so nice to follow in one's own time some of that. It was really great, and yeah. And then secondly, maybe it set a very good basis for looking at this AI issue, which was meant to happen tonight. Because what's happened to all these great thinkers when actually we've got a pile of algorithms that are actually spitting out opinions at us every day, and where are we in humanity? So maybe it really was a very useful hiccup in a way. Look forward to the AI session.
Thank you very much. Yes, we do make talks available. Robin and I will give careful consideration as to whether this deserves a wider audience.
There's 3 cameras going. And we try and edit it.
So we put these up on YouTube. We can also share the slides if people are interested in those. So if you just look for Barnes Philosophy Club online, you'll find the videos of our past talks, not our past talks, but philosophers' past talks. And the second point, I think what's interesting about, well, one of the things that's interesting about AI is that you'll find it's actually very, very good at philosophy. So you can ask it, what would Marcus Aurelius think of X, Y, or Z, or what did Seneca have to say about such and such a topic, and it will be extremely reliable at pulling together different ideas, arguments, and all the rest of it. So it's an increasingly interesting sort of philosophical companion, rather than something that's necessarily destroying the body of philosophy. Exactly what that does for social relationships is another thing. Robin, did you want to?
No, I think that's right. Thank you.
Do we have some more? I think
Tom, I think I had a question. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah.
Who were the cynics?
Oh, yeah. Please do ask us that.
Well, Diogenes is the master.
Yeah, Diogenes was the. We had a meme on Diogenes, didn't
Yes,
we?
yeah.
He was the one who famously lived in the
In the
barrel.
barrel, yeah.
Where is he? Here we go. This on the right is an Athenian pretending that they hadn't seen him, because he tended to hang around in the public forum doing relatively obnoxious things that he shouldn't have been doing, and picking fights with people. So cynics were certainly an inspiration for Zeno.
Yeah, I think, coming to the modern time, you've got Nietzsche, and you've got the old arguments between Russell and the apostles at Cambridge. They were a bunch of cynics, and necessarily wanting to attack, should we say, the idealism, the virtue ethics of Aristotle. Aristotle's very extreme in terms of his virtue ethics, and the guys, the Stoics, for example, Marcus Aurelius, paying lip service to them, but perhaps not being so driven by them. But the skeptics and the cynics just, I think, took that as a target. They just built their whole philosophies upon undermining the kind of virtue ethics that, and why? Why did they do that? And I think that's coming back to what I think about is what was going on in their minds in terms of wanting to necessarily undermine what was a pretty well established and good and practical system.
Yeah, I don't know if we have any experts on the cynics who want to weigh in, but my sense is that they were a bit more countercultural, a bit more ascetic, more focused on withdrawing from society and focusing inwardly, hence the idea of living in a storage jar in the public square. And being generally obnoxious to people. I think he used to go around with a lamp, saying, "I'm looking for an honest person." So it was that sort of character. Yeah, a weirdo is probably fair, and definitely withdrawing from questioning, challenging society rather than participating fully and healthily within it. Paul, do you want to chip in on that one?
I'll just pass it to
Oh, we
this
have
chap.
another one. Sorry, yeah.
I was going to just firstly push back on sort of what they were trying to do, and my understanding is that they're trying to bring to light the contradictions between simple philosophies. So an example is there's a discussion, it's like, what is a man? And it's a non-haired biped, and Diogenes comes in and plucks a chicken and goes, here is your man. And so I see it not as objection for objection's sake, but trying to highlight where a theory falls down, where it sort of breaks down and maybe has contradictions.
Yeah, I think absolutely fair comments. I think in some ways connects back with Socrates, right? Asking questions to expose hypocrisies, foolishness, misunderstandings. So yes, I think probably I was unfair saying being objectionable for its own sake, but certainly he took it to extremes.
But I was going to actually ask a question that
just
came up after what was said. So you talk a lot about virtue and sort of said, they should just be virtuous. Did they actually write anything more in depth about how you define that virtue system? What are the sort of parameters of that in the way that other sort of belief systems really lay it out, what they see as a virtuous life?
Yeah, so based on, for example, Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, which I've focused on mostly, I think the metaphysics and the structure is quite light, I would say, compared to maybe Western philosophers later. There is this reference to the rational universe, but it's kind of taken as a given. I don't see a lot of argument for it beyond, there's a lot of wonder in nature and so on, and see how well made the universe is. There's that sort of watchmaker argument, as it was called later, for the rationality. And then I think in terms of the virtue and the underpinning for that. My
Well,
sense is it's quite epigrammatic.
yeah,
It
yeah.
is often very
It's-
compressed. And
it-
do this, and these are the
it's
list of
conceptual
rules.
as opposed to dogmatic, like Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, book 11 and 12. That is very dogmatic. That is very structured. Yeah? And in contrast, the Stoics are much looser in their
Maybe looser than Aristotle.
Oh yeah. But that's why I had Aristotle top right, because he's idealistic, he's dogmatic in his own sense, whereas the Stoics are almost scared to commit because they're balanced, they're rational, they're calm, they're taking should we say cognizance of everything around them, as opposed to telling people what to do.
Yeah, I think I read it as a bit more, these are the right things to do. But I think, to Robin's point, certainly the meditations are sort of written for himself in a way, aren't they? So there's the sense that the philosophers are trying to reassure and convince themselves rather than having total confidence. And there's a quite engaging tone often of we're all trying to work this out and it's not easy. So in that way, it's not as rigid as Aristotle.
But you've got the dogmatics, and you've got the cynics and the skeptics, Wittgenstein, attacking Russell. I mean, that's like a dog, attacking your leg. I mean, where does that come from? That isn't calm. That isn't balanced. That isn't taking other people's views into consideration. But that's the essence of Stoicism. It's central. It's balanced. It's taking other people's perspective into consideration.
Yeah.
Just lady here, and then I'll
Yes.
come to the
No,
gentleman.
I
at the
just
front.
noticed the lack of women in all this, and then
Yes.
I used them.
Did we try? No.
Yes, we did have a look, and I think it's the best I could really do, apart from professional philosophers. Of course, there are many women professional philosophers who are interested in the Stoics, but in terms of public figures, maybe this connects a little bit with it being a slightly macho. That's unfair, but there's a sort of, this is about being resilient and tough and in control of your own destiny, and those sorts of ideas, I think, perhaps appeal a bit more to people at the top left of Robin's diagram, the more aggressive.
I was thinking of Arnold Schwarzenegger, actually. Okay.
Schwarzenegger.
I can't do a Schwarzenegger accent. Okay, but
That's all right.
okay, you don't get muscles without pain. So you have to go into it's very macho, and but I don't know why women aren't represented.
Yes, I think it
That's
is.
a good question.
It is a good question. I don't know if others have thoughts on that.
Would you say Margaret Thatcher was one?
Was she? I put her in the dogmatic bracket, but
Yeah, I guess there's a sort of personal strength and doing the right thing
Resilience,
regardless
yeah.
of what other people think.
Yeah. But is that Stoicism?
I can't imagine her having carried around sort of laminated
Yeah.
Stoic quotes.
Quotes, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Huffington.
I must think what other people think about you.
And I think another fair point is that lots of people, lots of famous men, really, business titans, are described by others as stoical. Warren Buffett, for example, is described as a sage and being a stoical thinker. But I don't think he's ever particularly described himself as such. So I think it might also be that we tend to look at and for men and think of them as stoical. Yeah, I think there are various stereotypes at play in it.
Oprah Winfrey.
Oh, go and say more.
Oprah Winfrey.
Do you want to present a case for Oprah being a stoic, or do you want Robin's view on that?
No, I'm a great fan of Oprah Winfrey, and she's very talented and very insightful, and she's very perspicacious, and I think that again is the essence one of the essences of Stoicism is understanding.
Yeah, the sort of calmness and openness to others' motivations and emotions.
And inquiring as well. as opposed to not listening.
Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can. Yeah, hold the microphone very close. So
Okay.
yeah.
My question is on the difference, if there is any, between Taoism and Stoicism, because I've always considered myself to be a Taoist. So I go with the flow, I look at the universe, not particularly as rational, but in awe, and I just go with the flow. And I don't worry about small things, and I don't worry about big things that I can't influence. This is all Taoism.
We didn't have time, because I was going to do some slides on Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, but we didn't have enough time.
And this really rings a bell with me.
Yes.
Though this is 200 years later than Taoism. I'm not sure. Taoism about 300 BC. I'm just wondering if there's any influence.
I don't think there's any evidence of influence, but there's such a parallelism between some of the concepts you're talking, especially in terms of nature. I think and Taoism is certainly one of the ones that does. It mirrors Stoicism. I think in terms of calmness and understanding and peace with the world. Yeah, am I?
Sorry?
Peace with the world.
Yeah,
peace.
and also tolerance.
And tolerance.
So I mean, Tao means the way.
The way, yeah.
And it's your way. So there aren't strict rules like Aristotle, just as isn't in Stoicism.
Yeah.
So you find your own way, and you're tolerant of other people's ways.
I would certainly say that Taoism and Taoism are more towards the bottom right, which is more ascetic, much more passive, more accepting. I think Stoicism tends to be a bit more interventional.
I think that's right. I mean, we did look a little bit at influences on religions, and I think there are vague ideas that maybe these ideas were travelling around, and I don't think I came across any direct evidence, but I think absolutely this idea that we should be receiving events of whatever kind with equanimity and balance, and I think in Taoism the metaphor of water and finding its way.
But Taoism isn't passive.
No.
It isn't passive.
Okay.
Like you might imagine it is, but it isn't at all. So the things that you can influence, the important things you can influence, you do influence. So it isn't a passive thing. I think it's further up on the right-hand side.
Well, the debate will rage.
Well, Confucianism is definitely upwards towards Aristotle. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think Taoism and Taoism, the way, is a bit more ascetic, as far as my understanding is concerned. But
I think maybe flexibility is sort of the thing. Like in Confucianism, you'd have more rules and order and structure, and Taoism more flowing and finding and improvising.
Correct.
And living in harmony with events. And Confucianism. Sorry, what was the other one? Stoicism. That's what we were doing. Somewhere in between. Yes, there we go.
Well, there's so much overlap and crossing of ideas. It's incredible.
Common themes. Do we have another? We have one at the front and then one a little bit further back.
First of all, thank you. You've taken us a very comprehensive journey. My point is, I was called a Stoic once.
Oh, very good.
Should I be proud or not? You haven't touched on Stoicism and pain.
Yeah.
I was on the operating theatre table, and the surgeon was going to do something. He said to the students, Mr. Miller is a Stoic, because this is a procedure where local anaesthetic doesn't work. It bloody hurt.
I'm sorry. Should you be proud to be referred to as stoical and the connection with pain? Robin, you're a surgeon. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think the answer is, simple answer is no. I think nobody should suffer pain, okay? But if you are going to suffer pain, then you're best to have the right set of attitudes. And I think that's what it's about. It's not about saying I'm okay to take the pain. It's how you deal and you cope with the pain during and after. And again, that comes back to what Nick was saying about CBT. And it's not hurting you now, but it was hurting you then, and you rationalise that. But as far as him calling you a Stoic, because you're about to undergo a painful procedure, I don't think that is really what Stoicism means.
Well, I talked a little bit about, and actually we were just touching on Taoism, the ability to respond to adverse events and to take them in stride, including physical pain. And the Stoics do talk about suffering physical pain and that it will pass, that it doesn't define us, and so forth. So I think that there's some basis for, yes, if you can tolerate pain, that's stoical, and you can be proud of being stoical in that way, which was the question you started.
Colloquially, Stoicism is tolerating and turning the other cheek and being generally passive about it. But that isn't what Stoicism is. It's about analysing and thinking about how you're going to react to that pain, to the circumstances, to the insult, to the injury, whatever it is, or the loss of someone, or death.
Yeah, where I think it can be a bit pernicious, and maybe this was perhaps an issue in medicine. No offence, Robin, but the idea that you've just got to put up with it, and it's up to you to be stoical rather than it being up to the practitioner to prevent the bad thing happening, or the professional to prevent the bad thing happening for you. So there's that kind of criticism of Stoicism I referred to briefly as blaming victims and sufferers for not being stoic enough, and it can be a little bit hard to say, or to tread that line between saying, we want you to be more resilient and we want you to have courage and tolerate adverse circumstances, versus saying, you just got to put up with it. We had thank you. We have a couple more towards the back. We've got time for just a few more, and then we can continue in the
Sorry,
bar.
this is going back to the comment made by the lady just over here about the absence of women in the talk. And it just struck me afterwards that in the list of modern Stoics, Bill Clinton, Jack Dorsey, there was Huffington.
Yes, Ariana Huffington.
I think she's female.
Yes, she was our one from the world of business or media, and I mentioned she carries around a laminated piece of paper with some inspirational Stoic quotes. So I understand. So she's actually into it rather than just being called a Stoic by others. So there are some.
You could argue, I think, that women are, this is a dangerous comment now.
Sexist generalisation. Yeah, let's have that. Good.
But their lives revolve around coping with adversity and suffering. So they're natural.
Or called upon to be stoical and put up with it. Yes, you could. Yes, you could also say.
That's a sweeping generalisation, but it is true. And their priorities are often for others.
Yes.
So, first time I've ever thought about this, that if a philosophy was successfully pervasive, what would society look like? And would we end up, if everybody became Stoic and just went with the flow and lived in harmony, in a Stepford Wives situation? and the other point I was going to say is, a lot of people might argue people should try to back to the Taoism. Stoicism doesn't seem to have any ambition to be what you want to be. And I think that is a natural human nature thing, as well as living in harmony. They're both romantic ideas which conflict with each other. The Stepford Wives one is an interesting question.
Of course, yeah.
It's you've hit it nail right on the head. That social control, whether it be religious, political, military, revolution, whatever happens around the insane edges, and if you understand what history about these shifts, these social shifts, revolution and counter-revolution, and Stoicism almost sits like one of my favourite images is from David Attenborough, and he was filming, this gorilla, this ape, okay, and this ape, this sort of senior ape. I don't think he was the alpha male, but he was sitting there, and he was just sitting there, and it was just, the world was just whizzing around him, and he wasn't getting involved, but he was just reflecting on what was going on. But occasionally he'd go out and do something, but he was generally speaking just watching. And I think to answer your question, to try and answer your question about what kind of system would a purely Stoic society result in terms of politics, well, I think it could be something like we have now, yeah, which is a sort of liberal, flexible democracy, responding in certain ways, but not necessarily going to extremes. And that the beauty of not going to extremes is, I think, what kind of makes us British, and not necessarily, and certainly less prone to, shall we say, takeovers by dictators and oligarchs and people who can control society the way they wish. So I think, to answer your question, I think we've kind of got one.
It's very rousing.
It is rousing.
Yeah, and I think, I'd absolutely say, it's a sort of liberal society,
Democracy, a liberal democracy, yeah.
and a democracy, and one where people have, I was going to say a healthy respect for each other. I'm not sure respect is really there in the Stoics, but a sort of compassion and empathy and an understanding for each other.
The mere fact that we're having this discussion here about Stoicism tonight, and we're not going on about supporting a dictator or revolting, so far. Okay. It kind of proves your point. It's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just very quickly, you said, is there a lack of ambition in the Stoics? And I think that, or if we were Stoical, would we lack ambition? And I think it depends what you're ambitious for, doesn't it? And the extent to which you buy into this idea that the only real good worth valuing is your own wisdom, judgment, and character, rather than, for example, power, influence, or wealth. So I think they would regard themselves perhaps as ambitious or demanding, but for a different end than others. And I think the Stepford Wives comment you made is also a reasonable one, because there's lots of emphasis on controlling emotions and not getting caught up in them and just letting them pass. And I think as someone who perhaps does that from time to time, it can come across as quite unfeeling and uncaring, and that isn't necessarily what other people are always looking for from you. They might be looking for an appropriate level of emotion in your reaction, rather than you just being calm and rational and letting the outrage drift past you, rather than sharing in it and perhaps doing something about it. So I can see that objection.
Water, not ice.
Yeah. Do we have one or two more before we get?
You seem to be, I think, making a case that sort of we're all Stoics, really. Even Margaret Thatcher, though hard to argue she was a Taoist, I think. But even AI, with its focus on the present and its rational, non-emotional attempt to seek the truth and the best, is that because there's a sort of slightly vacuous core at the centre of Stoicism, which you mentioned earlier? I mean, I've realised I'm a Stoic. I never thought I was. Clearly I must be. But yes, is it because it's a very generalisable set of principles that almost, well, not almost everybody, but many, many people can ascribe to?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a thing to vote on. Like, who thinks, from what they've heard of Stoicism, it all sounds pretty reasonable, something you could buy into, something you support? generally? Do you have hands up? About two-thirds, so not everyone's convinced, at least on my account of it. But I think to the extent that it is a sort of obviously kind of philosophy, that might be because a lot of the values have made it through into Christianity, through the Roman emperors and through other philosophers and thinkers, at least in terms of the study of Christianity. And so a lot of these ideas are in the culture and seen as ideals for many of us. I'd be interested in hearing from some of the declared non-Stoics or the non-declared Stoics, so what people don't think is a shared or an easily accepted view. But I think certainly AI, as you can see, is very Stoical, because they're happy to do whatever is asked of them and to play their full part, and there's no objection or emotion, and and that's perhaps has a common cause, because AIs sort of do what we say we would like them to do, which maybe is to be stoical and helpful in that way.
I like your word vacuous, yeah, because if something's going wrong and some action needs to be taken there and then, you haven't got time to be a stoic. You have to be trained to react to a particular crisis or adversity, and that's what training is all about. And so if someone is standing there with a blank mind trying to think out what they're going to do, then that could be described as vacuous. And I think that, so in some situations, I think you have to override any tendency to be stoic and be prepared to take action, and that's what training is all about, whether it's medicine or military or whatever. So you can, in fact, Stoicism is a luxury then, yeah? A luxury that you have sometimes to take your time to make the right decision.
Do we have a final comment or question?
Presumably, even Marcus Aurelius wanted to beat the Huns. So he didn't beat the Huns. And he presumably thought they were awful people.
Yes, I mean, certainly he was participating fully, leading from the front in the battles, and he wasn't retreating into luxury and self-indulgence back in Rome. So I think that there is a very strong idea of duty, I would say. So it's not about retreating and being a sage in isolation.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to the point that if there is a crisis, you haven't got the luxury of Stoicism. You've got to stab the Hun, because he's going to kill you, yeah? If you're Gladius, right? Or whatever. And so the decision is made for you, yeah? So I think Stoicism comes into play when you have the luxury of having the time and opportunity to make the right decision.
Yeah, well, I think maybe Seneca at least would say, in those really tough situations, it's all the more important to do the right thing and not to be carried away in rage or disgust or some sort of negative emotional impulse. You should train yourself for adversity and be ready to do the right thing under pressure. And he actually puts a lot of emphasis on honour as well, doesn't he, in Letters from a Stoic, and cites various examples of people who would rather die than suffer shame of various kinds. So there is that, we need to respond in the honourable, proper way to adversity, even when it comes to the crunch.
But can I, please, may I talk about the shit hitting the fan now?
Yeah, well, I don't know. We have a minute. Yeah.
20 seconds. Okay, there's 4 people who shit hits the fan. Okay, they all react differently. My friend, I asked him about this. He's a 6'6" Irish guy. They said, "What would I do to the guy who threw the stuff?" I do that. Okay. And then others said, "Well, I think I'd tell him off and maybe clean it up later." So you have all these different possible potential reactions, yeah? And the question is, which is the right one? They all have their merits, some of them, how you react to that adverse situation. But perhaps the best is to calm, like a Stoic might hopefully do, is just take time and work out the best way to resolve the situation to everybody's benefit. Probably organise somebody to clear up, somebody to take the guy for counselling, somebody to calm down the person who's going to thump the guy. So just bring it all together in a calm and considered manner.
Very good. I think a good note to end on. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Emma. Thank you for indulging us and for having a really good conversation with us. We appreciated that. Sorry we weren't able to talk to you about AI this time, but we will get Mona back, we hope, when she's healthy again, perhaps in September. And next time, all being well, I think it's 26th of May, Tuesday the 26th, we have Eric Olson back from Sheffield. He was here a couple of years ago talking about whether or not we have souls. Bad news was no, we didn't. So if you missed that. But next time he's going to be talking about, could we achieve immortality another way by uploading ourselves and becoming fully digital? Yes, Paul, thank you for your help, and to Tom for your help. Thank you, everyone.
I'd just like to say at 6:30 a.m. this morning I got notification that Mona wasn't well enough to give the talk this evening. And I must say, according to Robin's grade, I visited every single emotion on there because I was very firmly in the lunatic version for about 3 hours. So I think it's pretty phenomenal that Robin and Nick have been able to put this talk together in just over 12 hours. So I'd like to thank them.
Please stay for a drink if you like, and otherwise please book on for the next talk, which will be done by professionals again. Thanks everyone.
I think maybe
Yes, absolutely.
well, no. Just taking everything quite calm. Are you staying around for a drink? That was Thank you very
Thanks for your question.
What about Queen Elizabeth II?
Yes.
That's what I should have said.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.